So I'm Mark Whiting. I'm chair of the board for the Hancock County Soil and Water Conservation District, and I'm here tonight to talk about backyard rewilding. This is a program that we've borrowed from others that have gone on before us. In particular, I would say that Doug Tallamy has had a lot of influence on this. And Doug Tallamy is an entomologist. I think he lives in Delaware, and he developed this homegrown national park program whereby people rewild backyards and other developed spaces and make them more hospitable to wildlife. And if you have the time, you should go to his homepage, the Doug Tallamy page or the Homegrown National Park page, and look at one of his longer videos. There's some short ones that are how to. There's a couple of long ones that are about an hour, and it's well worth it. He's a really good speaker. He's very entertaining and full of interesting facts. He's a real good salesman for this program. This program is also very similar to other programs that you see here and there. Maine Audubon has a program called Bringing Nature Home. It's also named after one of Tallamy's books. The Maine Planning Office and Department of Inland Fish and Wildlife has a program called Beginning with Habitat. That's a similar sort of thing. Both of them have maps, and I looked at the Beginning with Habitat map and noticed that the participants on Beginning with Habitat tend to be land trusts and other large landowners in Maine. And I think what we really need in Maine is something geared more towards the average person. So that's Tallamy's thing, is that climate change requires us to save 50% of Mother Nature in a functional way, so that the worst of climate change doesn't cause extinctions that cause ecological failures that lead to extinction of more animals. And ultimately, our own extinction is a real possibility here. And so we need to take this seriously, and I think this is a really good, very interesting program. So in the past, we've asked our gardens to be pleasant places for us to kind of feed our souls, and they've been meant to look good. I think we're getting to the point where we need these wild spaces, semi-wild spaces, renaturalized spaces to do much more than that. Increasingly, now they need to do these climate functions of sequestering carbon, saving pollinators, keeping water clean, and other ecological functions. In other words, we need our backyards in order to help us save the world. On this slide, there's a wild space in someone's backyard. It says on the map, Homegrown National Park. So one of the things that people can do when they go through these programs is they can get one of these little signs from their conservation district or from the Tallamy homepage or Beginning with Habitat. And it's a good way to recognize the people that have put in this effort. And it's also a way of alerting your neighbors that you're not just lazy, that you could mow the lawn if you wanted to, but you're doing something else with your home space. And also, hopefully the neighbors are interested in what you're doing. And it's a good way to bring other people into the program. So this slide has a couple of heat sensors, handheld heat sensors that are infrared in nature. And one is looking at a mowed lawn, and one is looking at a lawn that is just not mid-mowed, and it's kind of a tall meadow. And um, the heat sensor on the mowed lawn says 34 degrees centigrade, of course. This slide's from England, you know. So 34 degrees centigrade is 93 degrees Fahrenheit. And the other sensor says 25 degrees centigrade. So almost 10 degrees centigrade difference. That's 77 degrees Fahrenheit. So there's 16 degrees Fahrenheit difference between the surface of this mowed lawn and the surface of this unmowed, this meadow, basically. And I think this is a good reminder that, climate change is, about the fact that our home planet is out of control. It's moving in a direction that's very bad for everybody and everything. But we do have control over our future. And if we make the right choices, we can make things better. So the purpose of the backyard rewilding itself is not so much to cool off the planet, although that does happen to some extent. So that's the point of this slide, is that man-made spaces tend to be hot and dry and inhospitable, and increasingly inhospitable even for humans. And by just letting things go, becoming more natural, these same spaces can be quite a bit cooler. And it can be a sanctuary in a planet that's increasingly hostile. So this slide is about the conceptual framework, about why we're doing this. And as I mentioned earlier, Talamy argues very persuasively, and a lot of other scientists too have argued that we need to save at least 50% of the natural world to save ourselves from ecosystem collapse, mass extinctions, and failure of planetary life support systems. And the problem here is that humans have already altered quite a bit more than that. At least 80%, some say 90% of the planet has already been heavily exploited and is different from what it used to be and can be very hostile to most living organisms. Cities, agricultural spaces, even people's backyards can be biological deserts. And so we just can't keep all the goodies for ourselves. We have to share our planet with other people and with other living things. And by doing so, hopefully we can all survive this crisis. So, in other words, huge parts of the planet need to be recovered and restored to a semi-wild state. And we can do this in our own backyards. We can convert lawns that we already have too much of, and make it space for other living organisms. So this is Doug Talamy's book, Nature's Best Hope. What he's saying is that nature's best hope is us. And we need to figure out what we're doing and what we need to do next to make sure that we all survive this. So what does the future look like? So this slide is about a paradigm shift. On one side, there's a mowed lawn. On the other side, the right side, hopefully looking at the future, it's a yard that's been allowed to go wild. It's a very beautiful meadow. There's lots of flowers, probably a lot of happy pollinators, and probably lots of birds and other wildlife there. So we don't need to do this with all of our spaces. We're going to continue to have cities. We're going to continue to have big agricultural areas. We're even going to continue to have lawns, and we'll continue to landscape for people. But we need to put aside some of that space for wildlife and restore natural ecosystems so that we have a future. So the primary goals here of this program, the Talamy program, beginning with wildlife, Audubon programs, and the program that the district now is trying to adopt, So conservation districts nationwide are picking this up. In Maine, this started with Waldo County. It's spread to Lincoln and Knox. It's a really cool program. We're trying to do this here in Hancock County. And the idea is, number one, shrink your lawn. Uh, we're also asking people to get rid of invasive plants because typically invasive plants, well, they tend to take over and they don't have the same habitat value that the natives do. And also, once they get established, they can be really difficult to get rid of. We're also asking people to create no-mow zones. Just let part of your yard go, let it grow up, let it become more natural. We're asking people to turn off your outdoor lights at night when they're not needed. It turns out that lights confuse a lot of different organisms. It's not, you may have heard the sea turtles get confused when they hatch out on ocean shores and they go to the wrong horizon because in the olden days, the sea horizon was the one that was open and the one that was lit, the relatively bright horizon. But with urbanization and suburbanization, with people leaving lights on at night, the lit horizon is the opposite shore. It's going inland, which is a death trap for sea turtles. And fireflies and other organisms are often really confused by lights where they just shouldn't be. And so we can avoid this simply by keeping our yards dark at night. Or if you need security lighting for some reason or another, to use yellow lights or other non-white lights because they're less likely to confuse wildlife. We're also asking people to plant keystone species. We'll talk about keystone species in a minute, but keystone species are the ones that are extremely important and have a disproportionate amount of wildlife value. So we'll come back to that one. We need to welcome pollinators. Pollinators are extremely important, not just for agriculture, but for living ecosystems. So many of our plants are flowering plants, and all of those plants need pollinators. And we're asking people to avoid chemicals as well. Not only pesticides and herbicides, but also fertilizers. Basically, any unnecessary use of chemicals would be a good idea because these chemicals don't go away. And we're finding again and again that our herbicides don't disappear. We put them out in the environment and it stays there and it ends up in our water and it ends up in our bodies, and we need to quit doing that. So here's another slide, very similar to one that we saw earlier, asking us to rethink beauty. So there's a lawn on the upper part and a beautiful meadow on the lower part. Rewilded spaces can be really gorgeous, and lawns. Some people really like lawns. I've never been one of those people. So they have their place. It's a good place to play frisbee with a dog. It's the place where you would want to set up your badminton net. But mostly these are really kind of boring spaces. And wildlife feels the same way. Okay, so keystone plants. As I say, these are plants that just have so much habitat value that it's hard to conceive of wild spaces without them. So for instance, some of the best plants for supporting wildlife are trees. And no surprise, they're really big and they have a lot of space and they provide a lot of physical structure to natural spaces. So so a lawn is basically kind of two-dimensional. A forest is clearly three-dimensional, and it provides all that other space for all those living organisms. And so oak trees and willow trees and maple trees and certain other species support um, just hundreds of just so maples, for instance, support 400 caterpillars alone, 400 species of caterpillars. So those are just the moths and the butterflies, not to mention all the other insects. And you can say something similar about maples and willows. Um, it turns out, I forget the statistic exactly, but it's something like 13% of the plants support 80% of the wild species. So that's what we're talking about with the keystone species. These are just so important that that it's hard to imagine doing without them. So if you like hummingbirds, for instance, you might be very interested in lilacs, even though the Persian lilac is not native. But my hummingbirds arrive in the spring about the time that the lilacs come into bloom. And lilacs have been here in Maine for 400 years, and the organisms that live here have learned to take advantage of that resource, and it's just a fabulous resource for those pollinators that have a really long tongue or beak, like hummingbirds and moths and butterflies. Um, so I know someone else, a member of the Ellsworth Garden Club, who just wouldn't have a garden without buddleia. So again, here's another plant that is not necessarily native, at least not to our area. So I think buddleia is native to Mexico. It's where monarch butterflies come from originally. It's where their migration starts from. And it's just such an important butterfly plant that maybe you would just have to have one in your garden. So anyway, yeah, so we're talking about keystone species. Many of these are natives. Some of them may not be. A good place to look for these are certain key websites. So the website, so this particular slide is from the National Wildlife Federation. And there's another website for Maine Audubon. Tuolumne, his Homegrown National Park website is also useful for this sort of thing. So, and your conservation district too, and your garden clubs are good resources for this. So, what are the keystone species? If you're interested in what the trees are, what the understory trees are and shrubs, what the meadow flowers are for your area, you can look this up on a list, and you can use this as a menu to select things of interest to you. So here's an example. So trees that are most important. So here's an example. So quercus, white oak, black oak, 436 different caterpillar species that use this as a host plant. Prunus, so this is American plum, black cherry, choke cherry, 340 species, just the moths and butterflies. Betula, so these are the river birches, sweet birches, 284 different species. Populus, so such as eastern cottonwood, 249 species. Box elder, silver maple, sugar maple, 238 species. Southern crabapple, 237. So you get the idea. So, so here's an example of a menu that you might select from. Some keystone flowers for our area that I picked off a website include black-eyed Susan, smooth aster, lance leaf coreopsis. There's pictures of them, all gorgeous flowers. Not a homeowner? No problem. Doug Tuolumne has an example of a downtown lot in Chicago. And it's kind of in the middle of the town. It's a cute little house. It's been there for 100 years. It's on a lot that's well under 1 acre. But the woman who owns the place is a really avid gardener. And she has some plants in the ground, and she has a porch, and there's potted plants all over the place. And she's supporting about 40 species of bird on this little parcel of hers. So I think, again, everybody has options about things that they can do to contribute to solutions. So a couple of eastern temperate forest plants that grow very well as potted plants are the bluewood aster and smooth aster, which I've selected for this slide. So again, what are we trying to do? So national parks and other formal green spaces are just not enough. They're just too small. We need to preserve and reforest and make wild millions of square miles of space. And the only place we're going to get that kind of space is from spaces that are already greatly modified. So homeowners can do their part. They can sacrifice some of their yard area. It's important to, if you have a yard that already has a lot of wild space, some trees, natural areas, it's important to preserve that. And if you have more yard than you really need, you need to decide that you don't need it, and you might convert that into a semi-wild space, a meadow or something like that. Farmers have things that they can do. Commercial foresters have things that they can do. There are special programs. USDA works with these landowners. They can actually be paid to support pollinators. It would be nice if we had a program like that for the homeowners. We're not at that point yet, but there might be a way of working with towns where you might get a tax break, where if you commit some part of your yard to rewilding so that you're providing a public good, there might be a way of getting a tax break. So we're working on it. This is a problem that we're still trying to figure out. So here's some eye candy. So this is a photograph of an 800-year-old oak tree in Germany. And there's a little kid kind of sitting on one of these roots. And if you didn't see the upper part of the tree, you might think, well, this is a redwood or something. But no, it's an oak tree. And these trees, oak trees and other sycamores and chestnuts and other trees have the potential to actually get this big. But you can't cut them down. So in order to live 800 years, you have to leave them alone. And it's been really hard for us to do that. And we need to cultivate that ethic where we value things that are really, really old and special and set them aside and not build a dollar store there or whatever. Okay, so what's the plan? So the district is trying to help. Hancock County Saltwater Conservation District, we're co-located with USDA here in Ellsworth and Hancock County. We do a free consultation. We'll come out to your place. We'll walk around your property with you. We'll help you identify native plants and alien plants. We can help you decide, what your options are. We can even help you get there. The free service is just the first visit. If you really want a design or something like that would take many hours of our time, that's a professional. That's a professional service, and we have to charge for that. Someone else would charge for that. We haven't quite figured out how to provide that kind of thing for free yet. And then once you've got a plan and you know what species you're interested in, then you need to jump in and get your boots on and get your trowel out, and you need to start. And after after you've been into this for a year or two or three, you might come back to your district and want to get certified. And so I mentioned the little signs earlier. So they're popping up all over the place. So Washington State and Oregon have been really big into this. On your Facebook sites, if you follow natural resources topics, you may have seen some of these signs popping up. These are becoming common now in Waldo and Lincoln Knox County, and we're going to start doing this here. So once you got started and you've reached a certain level, then you can get certified and get one of these signs. If you want to take it to the next level, I mean, that's great too. If you don't have a lot of time or effort to put into this, that's fine too. I mean, anything that you can do can help. Here's some more eye candy. So again, this is a really big tree. If you couldn't see the top of the tree, you might think, well, this is a redwood. This is actually a live American chestnut. And I don't know what the circumference is. It looks like it's about, I don't know, 8 or 10 feet wide, looking at it from this angle. So in the old days, chestnuts were sometimes referred to as the redwoods of the eastern United States. And Doug Tallamy actually has some photographs from the 1880s. And you would swear, you know, there are these guys with these beards and these hats, and you would think, that could be John Muir, and those are redwoods. And no, so it turns out it was a photograph from the 1880s from upstate New York. And so we have trees right here in Maine that could get this big. Oh, and here's a couple, lovely couple, older people with one of these certified backyard habitat signs. I think that's the one from Washington State. So this is what we're trying to do also. Okay, so 10 things to get yourself started. So we talked about shrinking the lawn. We talked about removing invasive plants and planting keystone species. It's important to be generous with your plantings because it takes a certain density of these plantings to really make a difference, to impact a significant amount of wildlife. We also need to reduce our nighttime light pollution. This is important for animals. It's also important for your neighbors that might have a telescope and might want to see Mars or something. Light pollution is a real issue for wildlife and for humans too. We also need to work with our neighbors, our human neighbors as well as our wildlife neighbors. We need to build a conservation landscape. To the extent that we can, we need to quit mowing, or if you do keep mowing, just setting the mower up 3 inches or greater has a lot of impact. If you have taller grass rather than shorter grass, you also have deeper roots, and you double the amount of biomass on the ground that way. And so plants are the bottom of the food chain. They, because they're photosynthetic, they take light and carbon dioxide, and they make food. They make plant tissues that other organisms can feed on. And just mowing differently than you did before can also just make a big difference. So we need to create caterpillar pupation sites under trees. So the space underneath trees is one space in particular where you may not want grass. These spaces, so grass in our part of the world is not native. And the native environment underneath trees is leaf litter and black forest soil, and caterpillars pupate there, may spend the winter there, and a lot of other insects are down there. There's bees that nest in the ground and many insects. And so we need to learn to leave these spaces alone. We also need to stop spraying fertilizer or other chemicals around. And we need to educate our neighbors so that we kind of bring everybody into this network. And then there's an 11th thing. So this is Doug Tallamy's Get on the Map poster. And what I like about this is that it's a lot like the beginning with Habitat Map, but it's for us, it's for homeowners. And it gives us a feeling for how we're doing, making progress. And I think we need to know that. I think we need to know how we're doing so that we need a sense of accomplishment, I think. We need that for ourselves, but we also need government to notice, and we need the federal government, the state government, and others to take this seriously and become part of this movement. And people who study social movements say that it takes about 25% participation before you reach a point where other people kind of jump on board automatically. And so it's just the few of us, the activists, that gets these things started. And then you need to bring in other people, and then you need to reach this critical level where other people begin to take notice and get on board as well. So in order to have a movement that really has some purchase and can make a difference, we need to bring in others, and we need to kind of get on the map so that we can all see how we're doing. So I hope that you do the 10 things, but also the 11th one, and make a commitment online to preserve spaces that are already wild on your property and to rewild something that you don't need. Probably lawn, hopefully lawn. So thanks for coming tonight. And if you have any questions about what we've been talking about, come and see us at the Conservation District. As I say, there are also other participants in these programs. We're working on this together. It's not a competitive thing. It's something that we're doing together. So you can also go to the main Audubon website, beginning with Habitat, the state website, Natural Resources Federation website is another good one. So there's a number of these. So check them out, become interested, get involved. Thank you.